all the devices I have for measuring my health on a daily and weekly basis. So you can't measure everything every day, therefore I decided I would do a few measurements weekly. Currently this is Saturday, and now let's go to the daily measurements. The daily measurements consist out of two different things. The first one is a blood pressure cuff, and the second one is a body fat scale, or also bioimpedance scale. This one is manufactured by Camtron, but there seems to be a generic brand with a kind of generic app, which is very similar to other apps and other scales you also find on Amazon. I measure myself in the morning with this here, and then the results show up automatically, at least if you have opened up the app, which is called FeelFit, but you can also sync it with an app called Ren4Health. It gives you bone density, it gives you muscle mass, it gives you body fat, and a few other things that are seemingly important. Now, the question is obviously, why would you use this if this is somewhat accurate? There is a theory, and this theory is not so much a big theory, but rather just a way of thinking. Of course, this is off, but if you use the same scale and even the same scale over years, it will be off probably by the same margin up and down. So overall, it's probably better to keep track of your weight and also your body fat with a scale like this compared to not doing it. Now, the second thing I have now on a daily basis is a blood pressure measurement with a blood pressure cuff. Now, this is made by a brand called Omron, and this brand was recommended by Peter Attia, who in his book, but also on an episode of the Huberman Lab podcast, talked about, first of all, the importance of having kind of an idea of what your blood pressure is, and also the idea that many people probably have hypertension. Now, therefore, I decided already a few years ago to eventually get a blood pressure cuff. I just skipped out on it because it costs a little bit. Now, a few years ago I did a few measurements, single measurements, and then I realized, I didn't realize, but I got this watch. This is the Galaxy Watch 4, and it can actually measure blood pressure. Now, the problem is just it needs to be calibrated every few weeks or months. I think it's about 2 months. And so I measured it, basically I calibrated it with another device I had access to, but then as I did not have access to a device any longer, I did not have these measurements any longer. There's another thing which is also, I think, something that is to consider, a factor that is to consider. So the thing is, if I measure on my Galaxy Watch here, and then I measure for 3 months, and then I calibrate again, or I don't calibrate, and then I have a few readings in Samsung Health, so basically in the same database with a blood pressure cuff, then all of these devices have different margins of error. And probably the margin of error on this device is a little bit bigger than on a kind of professional device like this here. Now, Peter Attia also talks about the fact that a lot of these cuffs, especially the automated ones, seem to be a little bit off, or to a large extent off. But probably it's better to have something at least compared to nothing. So I don't take my blood pressure with this any longer. I also haven't calibrated it as of lately. And of course, this is a little bit bigger, and if you want to travel, there is also an option from, I think, Withings, which is basically just kind of a longer block, and is not this stable thing, but it is a thing you can wrap around. Now, there are these traditional blood pressure cuffs, which have a device and then a tube connected basically to the cuff itself. I did get this one. This one connects to an app called Omron Connect via Bluetooth, and the big upside of this, in my eyes, is that I don't have to rely on this device. The downside of this is that this device is fairly dumb. It only has like a small display. I can show it to you if I turn it on, but it will probably result in an error. So as I turn it on with this button, it then begins to pump up as you already, it expects that you already have basically it attached to your arm. So now I stop it again, and then I can show how to apply this. So basically you can, with one hand, because the other one is basically attached to the arm anyway, you're trying to measure from or at, then you can wrap this around, and with basically this finger you can then tighten it, and then you can just press this. Then I usually stand, because I don't specifically sit down, even though it would be better to sit down. It would be even better to sit down for, I think, 10 or 15 minutes, and then to take 2 or even 3 readings. Now, the app called Omron Connect tells me to do 2 in the morning and 2 in the evening. So I usually do the morning ones. In the evenings I don't usually, so recently I've been trying to also get these readings, because then the average for the day seems to be better. And also in the morning and in the night it's probably a little bit different. In the evening maybe a little bit higher, in the morning a little bit lower due to the regeneration due to sleep and also the lack of food and also the lack of stress that has occurred during sleep, even though there might also have occurred stress during sleep if this was a grammatically correct sentence. So why do I do these two on a daily basis and the other two not on a daily basis? I mean, the scale is pretty self-explanatory. It's just something you need to step on, but actually not, because in theory the scale could store a few values and then transfer the values every time the app connects. But in practice, the app seems to maybe not be able to run in the background, or, well, the values just don't transfer automatically as you would expect. So you could also maybe have a Wi-Fi scan and then the values would automatically transfer via Wi-Fi, but because of the Bluetooth connection, I usually open up the app, wait until it is transferred and then close the app again. The same is true with this one. I did it a few times or a few weeks where I just recorded it on here, but then I think I've also lost some data. Now, 2 readings of this, they take about 1 to 2 minutes, so 1 minute each and then 2 minutes in total, is a little bit of a time investment, especially if you want to be quick in the morning and then go out and get out of your home and so on and so forth. But I found that if I do this on a weekly basis, then I only have like these 2 measurements, which then are averaged out. And if they are inaccurate, then I probably have not a very accurate picture of my blood pressure. So I already have been seeing kind of a trend, of course, with the weight for years now. I have had the scale for, I think, since 2019, that's about 4 years now, and the blood pressure cuff I bought in the beginning of this year, and I already noticed some trends. So in the beginning of the year, basically my blood pressure went just down and down and down and down, and now it's going up like this. I don't know the specific reason for this, other than a few factors I could think of, but these are not that important for this video. Now we switch to the other measurements. So as I do these 2 on a daily basis, so basically every single day, I had to find an interval for the rest of the measurements, and I think it makes sense to rely on the heuristics people already use when it comes to time, and also when it comes to other areas. And the next bigger metric would just be the week. Of course, you could also do something like this on a monthly basis, but what I found is that as the month is not standardized in terms of the length, the day where you would then take a measurement at the 30th of every month, or at the 1st of every month, it then switches the day. And what I found is, because the week is standardized and the week is ever long repeating, I just now picked a week, and this is kind of the schedule I am running on. I'm not doing like monthly things in any way. When it comes to health, I think I rotate a few workouts on a bigger schedule, but not exactly planned. It's more like, okay, I can do this right now, and then maybe next month I do this, or next week. And so maybe over 2 months, over the period of 2 months, I maybe have 8 workouts I have on one day that I rotate, but not so important for this video. So the other day I searched out is the Saturday. Why the Saturday? Because on Saturday I also have this day I can go to the gym and do some additional exercises, and included with these additional exercises are also measurement exercises. So there is an app from my gym, and this gym works with a company called eGym, and eGym now has machines that adapt automatically via basically electronic motors that are installed in the devices, and then you can take 1 rep max tests at these devices, or at these machines. So basically a chest press, for example, or it could be also a back extension or a curl, and then you take these 6 1 rep max tests. At least at my gym there are only these 6 devices, and these are then updated automatically into the app, and then a biological strength age is calculated. You can in addition input your own exercises, not necessarily your own, but there's an exercise selection. So somebody thought this up. What would be the exercises where you could basically, what would be the exercises or the exercise selection that together would be the best proxy for biological age, biological strength age in this regard? And so I've recently, for example, I recently did a full circuit of these exercises specifically, but what I usually do is just these 6 exercises, because it's just these 6 exercises and it's basically a touchscreen. You can say, okay, I want to do a strength test, and then you just press once, and that's basically it. So I'm done in like 2 minutes with this, whereas the other exercises, it's a full-blown workout. And I found even that there are things like bodyweight squats in there, and then I recently did those, and I just stopped after 500 because with the resting times, not so much the resting times, but depending on how long it takes until you go down, and then maybe you rest a half a second at the top and maybe not. And so I found that this was probably not something I would want to invest my time in the future just for testing. The thing with testing in general is that the testing itself, especially when it comes to not testing something like your blood pressure, but testing physical performance, in some way could also be seen as exercise. So therefore, for example, on the Huberman Lab, he had a series. Huberman Lab is a podcast about health and performance, and it is made by Dr. Andrew Huberman, who has not a medical doctor, but just a PhD doctor. And he talked about the fact that after his series with basically performance specialist when it comes to physical performance, Dr. Andy Galpin, also a PhD, he had trouble finding the right testing interval. So at which interval do you actually test things? Because if I, for example, want to do a 1K sprint or a 5K run, or the 1K sprint would not be so much a sprint in my, for me at least. The question is, when do you train? So when is basically the period at which you train for something, and when is then the something? In my mind, what I made up is kind of this framework that every single workout is a test anyway, and every test is a workout anyway. So it's kind of both of the same. And because I track now every activity I do physically, not so much walking, but walking, of course, the steps, every workout is tracked anyway, and therefore every workout I track in the gym, for example, is a performance measurement of my deadlift, of my max deadlift. So I do, for example, a max deadlift in the beginning, and then I do a normal working set, and then maybe I do a third set. And therefore, because I then track this is basically just my performance over time. Because if you think about it, if you have like in a year, you do 3 performance tests, then these 3 tests are not so... they don't say so much, because these are only 3 tests. But what about all the other days? So basically you can go infinitely small, and you could test your bench press strength every single second. But of course this would not make that much sense, because you have to have regeneration times and so on and so forth. So what I figured is that every single workout is basically a test if I can track it, and if it makes sense in terms of time to track it. Now let's go to the other measurements that are not so much workout measurements, but just the other, you could call them health measurements. And these I store basically in these zipper bags, because I just store them in here. The next one is a proxy for strength, for overall strength. The idea is that basically, because we lift so much with our hands, of course we could also see our feet and our legs as something that carry a lot, but because we also lift a lot with our hands, you could use hand strength and rather grip strength as basically a proxy for overall strength. Now, this is the idea of the dynamometer. So it's basically a thing where you can grab your hand around this handle here, and there are these 4 indentations, and then you can grab it with your 4 fingers, and the other one is on the other side, and then you just press as hard as you can. So it's again a 1 rep max test, and then it's maybe 40.9 kilograms before. So I recorded the video before once already, but I stopped because I, well, made a few mistakes. It was a little bit higher, but, well, it's not that high now. Now, you could also do the other hand, because you have both hands, or 2 hands, and they probably are a little bit different. And then it shows 43.7. Now, the problem with this is it's not a smart device. I also didn't find a smart device. What this is called is a dynamometer, or dynamometer, however you pronounce it correctly. So what I needed is a way to track this. Now, in the past I've used an Excel sheet to track basically a lot of different things, but now I think it's easier for the most part to just use a service that is already kind of targeted towards something like this. Not so much with this device, because there is no... I found one app that is specifically made for tracking these values, the dynamometer grip strength values, but it was not very well made. So what I am currently using is an app called Strong, and I just made 2 custom exercises, which are dynamometer right hand and dynamometer left hand, and I just enter these values, and therefore I have them tracked and can see graphs over time, because this app conveniently plots those. Whereas Garmin, for example, does not plot my strength over time, which is kind of unfortunate. Similar to how unfortunate it is that that my English today is pretty not good, and it seems also to not improve over time. Okay, so much about this here. Maybe a few additional notes. This here is from Baoblaze. This is from Amazon, but you can also buy it from Alibaba for about half the price. In terms of price, this might be interesting anyway. I think this was around 120 euros. So if you are thinking in dollars most of the time, then it's a little bit less. Now, it's actually a little bit more than euros because the euro is a little bit more expensive. So for 1 euro, you have to have a little bit more of a dollar to buy it. Now, this here was 30 euros and this here was 50 euros, but I saw it again on AliExpress later on for 25 euros, plus the shipping cost, so maybe about 30 euros for the dynamometer. It does charge via micro USB. It also comes with two triple A batteries, which you can also insert, so there are two different ways of powering up this device. You can also store a few values on this device, up to 3 or 5 users, but I don't use them. I just read whatever it says, and then I input it into Strong. Now, the next device is a blood glucose monitor. Now, similar to every other measurement, it would be nice if you could measure it continuously. So there are blood pressure monitors which measure continuously. So basically, as of the state of current technology, there is also a new technology which seems to be developed or in the development by many companies, such as Samsung, for example, who have. So there have been rumors for years that into the Galaxy Watch they wanted to implement basically blood sugar measurement without the needle that sticks itself into your skin. Now, this would be non-invasive and this would be probably very useful for lots of people, also maybe for me, because then I would have insight into my blood sugar and whether and to which extent that is healthy and optimal. Now, this here is kind of an old school device. It is just a Bluetooth device, so not that old school. It is made by a company called Contour, and this is called the Contour Next One. I bought this because it was very sleek, similar to an old MP3 player. It actually looks also very similar to an old MP3 player. And it also comes with this very nice bag, so you can basically throw it into a travel bag if this is something you really need. Now, there are lots of people who have diabetes, either type 1 or type 2, and these people needed to rely on something like this in the past. Now, not so much, because there are continuous blood glucose monitors. Now, these continuous blood glucose monitors are basically a small ring of plastic, and the small ring of plastic, it's not a ring, but it is filled, so it is basically a round thing, and it has a needle that sticks out of it. So this here, for example, has also a needle. And then this goes for most people into their underarm, and then it measures your blood glucose constantly. And then these people who have actually diabetes have to then insert insulin in some way into their body via injection, usually, I think. Now, I don't have to do this. I don't have diabetes, very fortunately. And these are the needles, so I can show you one of these maybe, or I actually will show you one of these as I basically open up this device here. And the needle is then inserted into this here as it focuses, and then this here has a feather, or rather a mechanism that basically puts this device then, so you basically open this up, and then as you press this button, the needle basically goes out and then it goes into your skin. Now, for these devices, what you usually do is you take one finger and then the side of the finger, and then you put this in. I will not do a measurement right now because first of all, the blood, and I don't want to have this in the video. I also did something like this already, but well. And then the next thing you need is a test strip. I don't have any test strips any longer, so this is just a theoretical video because I have to reorder them. And these are also fairly expensive because it is a thing you have to reorder, so therefore kind of a subscription, similar to the blood glucose monitors, which are also, you could say, a little bit overpriced. So if you want to get a blood glucose monitor, also maybe just for health monitoring, like I maybe would do, then it would cost you anywhere from 150 for basically half covering the month. So basically one sensor lasts usually 10 days or 14 days. And so there are basically two big companies. The one is Abbott, the second one is Dexcom, and they sell sensors, and these sensors then usually are synced either via NFC these days or also via Bluetooth to an app, and then there are different interpretation apps like Levels, like NutriSense or like Very, who then combine all of this data in an app. But this here is kind of the old school way, and it is only one measurement. But nevertheless, I wanted to get at least some kind of overview over what my blood sugar at least one day in the morning is, and this day would be Saturday. So I will probably rebuy these strips and then take one measurement at least a week of my fasting blood glucose on Saturday morning, or maybe it's on Sunday morning in the future. I don't know what the future holds in terms of my measurement protocol, to use the words Andrew Huberman uses. Now the next thing I only recently added is a thermometer, or also a medical thermometer. So this goes under the tongue, and then you press the button, and then it takes like 2 minutes, and then it shows you a value, which for me on Saturday morning usually is 30.5 point something. And this device, as a thermometer, it's usually used for measuring fever, but I thought it would be at least useful to kind of know what actually this would be at a normal state, because if I then have fever and it shows me 40 degrees Celsius, then, well, to what should I compare the two? Because, well, of course you could take the official things and the official guidelines for the ranges, but what would I actually have as a temperature? If I don't know that, then the comparability is fairly low. So I also found an app. This app is called Health Diary. There is a spin-off app which is called Fever Diary, but I found that Health Diary doesn't have ads, whereas the other one does. So it's basically just a timestamp and then the temperature input. Now, the next thing on this list, so I also recently got, actually, this is not so much on the list because this is not a standardized measurement, but I just got an infrared thermometer. This infrared thermometer allows me to measure the temperature of my cold bath. So in my shower, I do live in a kind of small city apartment, and in my shower I found a rainwater tank that fits into basically the basis of my shower. And I also froze up some ice already. I also used plastic bottles that are kind of not that hard, and got this into the freezer and use this basically as a cold or ice bath. But the question obviously is, how cold is it actually? And I just didn't know. So I bought this thermometer for a few bucks from Alibaba. Not Alibaba, but AliExpress. It comes with these very small batteries, and then you just press the button, and then you know how warm something is. And I also found this very interesting to just see how warm is my hand actually. So my hand right now is 27.3 degrees Celsius. And then you can, for example, measure your armpits or measure your skin on the outside, or maybe try to measure something similar to the clinical thermometer under the tongue, and then you just know what temperature this is. But before, I just had no idea, like how warm is my skin actually? How warm is my skin after a cold bath, or after 5 minutes at 0 degrees outside running in a tank top in shorts? And so this was also quite interesting. The next thing I've already had for years is this here, and these are urine stripes. These urine stripes or strips are basically things you put into your urine. Now, you basically have to collect your urine similar to you would at the doctor's office, just not at the doctor's office, but at your home. And then this needs to be in the urine for 60 seconds, and then you can read it out. Now, because this would also be very useful if this was kind of a smart process and not a process of then having this here and comparing it to the different colors that are on this bottle. There is also an app for this, but it doesn't automatically scan this. This would be nice if you just put it maybe for basically the whiteness of the light. Maybe put it on a white paper in daylight, or I don't know, and then have a readout of these colors, and then have it stored smartly in an app. But currently I've only found an app where I have to enter manually the different values. So the different values are basically, the baseline is this here, and then if there is something in your blood, depending on the value, for example, if the pH is slightly higher, then it goes into this direction. It actually is then, so the baseline would be 5, or if nothing happens, it basically would be 5. And then if you have something in your, not blood, but your urine, I also said blood earlier, then it just is colored in a different color. And this is just a very simple way to, for example, measure whether you have ketones in your blood, whether you have bilirubin in your blood, whether you have not blood but urine, and so on and so forth. So there are a few different things. Also glucose would be interesting. Why would you have glucose in your urine? Because your body wanted to get rid of it. Why would it get rid of it? Because maybe you have had too much sugar. So this is also fairly interesting. I also picked this up recently because I still have this bottle and there are still a couple of dozen stripes in there. Now the next thing is, we have two next things, and these two next things are, for one, this here, which is just a measurement tape, but meant for circumference measurements, and this here, which is the MIR Smart One. MIR stands for Medical Research, Medical International Research, and it is a device that measures peak expiratory flow. Now, what is peak expiratory flow? It's how fast you can blow air out. Now, as you blow air out, there is basically a stream of air that goes out of your mouth, and this stream of air then goes ideally into this, and there is a fan that then rotates, and depending on how fast this fan then is able to rotate, depending on how forceful you basically are able to inhale out, not inhale out, but exhale once, it then shows you a value. Now for me, the predicted value would be 610. This is liters per minute. There is also an additional value which is also shown in the app, because this also has an app, but the app doesn't have a cloud connection, so as you switch phone, you lose all the data, which is kind of unfortunate. I did not find a way to sync the data somehow. Now, this has on the back here also, I think, 2 or 3 AAA batteries. It's 2 AAA batteries, and these are just going in there and powering the device. It then connects via Bluetooth to the app, then you open up the app, and then you inhale once, very hardly, because the harder you inhale or the more air you inhale, the higher the value then is, the liters per minute you can output in theory. I will now do a test representative, which will be slightly weird. I don't know, till now I made this noise every time I do the test. You have to do 3 in a row, similar to the blood pressure cuff, and then you can unmount this, and then it is very easily stored, so it's not that big. Also, so I thought this was a little bit bigger, and then I was surprised that it was actually this small, and that I don't have to have that much space for it. So the additional value the app provides, at least, is called it's FEV1. I don't know exactly what it means, but it seems to measure something a little bit different, whereas this, the normal expiratory flow, measures more of the bigger... I read the Wikipedia article, but I am not able to explain it properly right now. I mean, the higher the value, the better. I also looked up actually my old values, because as a kid I had a little bit of asthma, and therefore I had an analog device similar to this already, and I actually, as of a few years ago, had this device still, and then I tried it a few times, and I took a picture, and because the picture has a timestamp, which is a very useful feature of pictures, I then could compare. And I could compare that currently it is still very low. And I also know that it is fairly low because it is below the predicted value. So currently I'm ranging 560, 570 liters per minute, whereas ideally it would be at 610 for my height and weight and so on and so forth. And the final thing is measurements. Now, in the past, I already tried to measure a few different circumferences of my body, but I kind of stopped. In the past, I had an Excel spreadsheet and I would type in the different measurements. The problem was that there was no description of how to properly do the measurements, and I also didn't write myself a description, and if I did, I probably would change it over time as I would learn more about this and about that, and then I would change it, and then the consistency of the measurements would be off. What I found now is that in the app from my scale, the FeelFit app, I also can input manual circumference values. So what this means is that in the last few weeks and also months and also a few years already actually, but not so frequent, only in the last few weeks I've done this measurement on Saturday, and mostly because I got a different measurement device, a different measurement tape. The main problem with a tape like this is that if you have this, for example, and you want to measure your chest circumference, then you measure your chest circumference and then you try to be relaxed, but do you actually want to try to be relaxed? Because if bodybuilders, for example, measure their biceps or their upper arm, do they really relax? Probably not. So the question is, what do you measure relaxed and what do you not measure relaxed? And if you then take your hip or your waist and then you suck in your waist, then of course it is not as high in circumference as if you would basically just leave it as is, or maybe even blow out, kind of leave the stomach out a little bit. this is the question. These are many questions. And so what I needed actually was a framework of how to properly measure. And this app gave the framework to me. Now, what I additionally found is that this is not a very good way of measuring, because you have to read it out or then hold it. But if you then hold it like this, then you have to mark the distance somehow, or the length of, in this regard, my chest somehow, or the circumference of my chest. And then you take this off, and then you maybe didn't mark it completely. So I found that this is just a very tedious way, and so I didn't really like the process. It was just not efficient enough. So I recently saw this on AliExpress. This was like 3 or 4 euros, and what this does is it creates a loop. And so there's this pin at the end, and this pin at the end you can insert again into the device. Of course you have to hold it, because otherwise this falls out. Now this means you have to have at least one finger where you hold this device. The second feature of this device is that it is a loop that is also connected basically to this spring roll, I think is the proper word for it. So basically something that pulls the tape in. And this something that pulls the tape in now makes it possible, because there is also this slide radius, or whatever it is called. And you can take it to the side, for example, and then just pull this in, or tuck this in. And then the next step is to just press this button, and usually with my index finger, then keep this. And then I can measure my chest, for example, like this. So it would basically take in a little bit more of the tape, and then I would measure my chest with the thumb. I would hold then this here, or I usually hold this, and then I can read out what it reads on here, which is then a little bit better in terms of, well, how easy it is. Also, if you want to measure your upper arm, for example, with a tape like this, then you do this here. And then how do you get to the other side? Or you do it like this, and then you connect it, and then you have to tuck it in, and then it rotates, as you are seeing, because it obviously rotates. And then how do you now read it out? Of course, you could read it out such that you can see it, but it is just a little bit tedious, as I mentioned. With this device now, what you can do is you just create a loop again, and you make the loop a little bit bigger, and then you go around your arm. I usually have 2 mirrors set up, so the first one would be in front of me, the next one would be the right mirror, or to my right, and then I can actually check my posture also in the side view, and then I just press this button again, and then I basically wiggle a little bit, and then I just take this. Of course it didn't work properly right now, as you saw, it just got out of this, and then I again have the measurement I can read out and then put into the FeelFit app. And that's all the different measurements I now do on a weekly basis. In total, I take circumference measurements. I now try to not forget to test my urine. There are also smart devices already that are basically things you put in the toilet, and then with a subscription of only 30 bucks a month, you can then read out. This is, I don't know, maybe 15 euros, and then these strips last for, depending on how many of these you use. I don't know how much there are in there. 100, I think. It seems to be 100. I've maybe used half of them. Or maybe not even half of them. I usually take a picture, by the way, to also have a proper reading, so basically a document. The one thing is the interpretation. Okay, at this time I meant, or I thought that this would be this color, but I also take an additional picture, because then I have basically alongside with the right light the thing next to this. And then this Mir Smart one, which measures lung function to some extent. The other thing that measures lung function would be something that is continuous, a continuous measurement such as VO2 max measured on this watch or this watch either. Then I have the medical thermometer and also the infrared thermometer. Then I have currently this blood glucose measurement device. I don't have a ketone breath meter. I've looked many times at it, but the question obviously is, where do you cut the line, or where do you stop? I mean, there are so many other devices I could get, and the one thing is that they cost a lot. The second thing is that they might cost something as you continue to measure, such as these here. With every measurement you have a continuous cost, or these here, the blood glucose monitor, where you have to continuously buy the needles and also the stripes. This, once you buy it, and if it doesn't have a subscription, is basically a free measurement forever, which is nice, apart from the batteries you have to put in. Similar with this here. You can just measure and measure and measure and measure. But there are, of course, things you then don't measure because they are actually constantly costing something. And then this is obviously also free. Now, every measurement in an ideal world would be continuous, basically infinitely small, maybe at the interval or the frequency, the measuring frequency of 1 second, maybe it's 10 seconds, maybe it's a day. At least when it comes to weight, it is then a day. And when it comes to a few other things, it for me right now is a week. But my resting heart rate, for example, or just in general my heart rate or my HRV, are things that ideally would be measured more continuously. Similar to all the other things, there is already, so I recently saw a video by Peter Attia where he mentions that in Europe there is already kind of a bracelet which then continuously is able to measure blood pressure, which would also be very interesting. But of course there are many different devices, there are also many different companies. For example, Garmin recently just forgot to track my sleep. I had it on as usual and it just didn't show any sleep at all. And this happens like every 2 weeks once, which is then unfortunate because if the data is kind of not that accurate, it's like if it doesn't even track my sleep, I mean, where should I begin to use this data then even? But at the same time, this is kind of what I've got, and this is probably what I want or need to work with or can work with. I have these 2 watches, which are basically the 2 devices I use for continuous measurement of my performance and also my body. Now, when talking about these devices, it is useful to say, or in my view, not necessarily in my view, but I just first got the Samsung Galaxy Watch. I got the Active 2, I previously had a Galaxy Fit 1, and then I got the Galaxy Watch 4. Now, this is able to measure a lot already, and you can also properly track workouts with it, and it is a fairly nice watch. It also measures ECG, it also measures blood pressure, so it is a little bit more health concentrated already. One of the main downsides of this watch is that it is kind of more on the software-based side. It also has a touch screen, and so as I, for example, stand in winter for maybe a 10-minute run outside, often I try to do cold exposure and then I stand out there with gloves and a tank top and maybe in shorts, and this watch just loads something for 20 seconds or just goes out of battery or something like this. And something like this happened again and again and again, so eventually I decided I would also, because I wanted to track or measure HRV, I decided to get a Garmin watch, which is just the more professional option. This is basically for measuring sport, because this does not have phone functionality, so you cannot call somebody with this, whereas this one has. So this one is in addition to all of the different functions it provides, measuring my steps, measuring my, in theory, also my blood pressure, but not continuously, measuring, in theory, also my HRV, but Samsung does not give a readout of this, so it only uses it for the stress metric. And well, you could track a few other things as well. With the newer watches, the Galaxy 5 and the Galaxy 6, or the Galaxy Watch 5 and the Galaxy Watch 6, you can, in theory, also measure body temperature, because it has a temperature sensor on it, but it seems that Samsung does not want you to track your skin temperature as of now. What would also be very useful, we circle kind of back to Andrew Huberman, is to track light exposure. And because I think at least the Galaxy Watch has a sensor that actually is able to adjust the screen's brightness to the brightness. So it has a brightness sensor. Wouldn't it be useful if you could track daylight exposure? Apple Health already did this, Samsung Health not so much. Also Garmin is lacking this feature. Now the newer Garmin watches, or a Garmin watch that has a solar ring built into it, so it would be a ring, like a solar panel, that basically converts light into energy, and therefore the watch is able to last a little bit longer in terms of battery. Now, you could use this metric, basically solar intensity, as kind of a proxy metric for how well your body was exposed to light. Of course, your eyes are not here. But if you go out and you have this maybe uncovered and not covered up with a shirt, then at least to some extent, this would get light, and similar to this, or similar even to your smartphone. If you have your smartphone and you are out and about, and you are out and about for maybe 10 minutes, or maybe it's 2 hours in a day, then probably this would be at least a better, would give you a better understanding of how much time you spend outside versus how much time you spend inside. And also, the phones already have a brightness sensor anyway, because they adjust the screen's brightness. So why not use this and create a meaningful feature that would give people the option to track their light exposure. Now, the Garmin tracks, in addition to all the other things, this can track, it doesn't track ECG, the newer Garmin watches do sometimes. It does measure HRV, which was very important for me because, this big metric HRV I wanted to have tracked, and I wanted to know how high is it or how low is it, and also use it as a predictor of health. And it actually was kind of a predictor of health, at least I could interpret the data this way. Now, of course, me talking about the data this way, I'm not a data scientist, but at least I took a look at, for example, my resting heart rate going up over the period of 12 weeks or maybe 3 months more, and my HRV was plummeting down to 38 milliseconds. And then another value, which I currently cannot remember, was also going into a bad direction. And then after months of not being sick, I got sick. This was only like days after all of these values basically went down and went down and went down. My sleep was the third metric I wanted to talk about. So what I've also been using the Garmin watch mostly now for is for tracking also my sleep. So I have now basically 2 independent devices, which is also useful because sometimes one device doesn't catch sleep entirely, and then I have at least the other, which then gives you a different number. Sometimes they both say, okay, the sleep was very good, then it probably was very good, compared to one device says sleep score is 10 and the other device says sleep score is 86, for example. Now, what this also allowed me to do is, for example, to optimize my sleep. I didn't get sleep scores above 75 or even 70 for months in the last years, but as of recently I tried a few different things, fasting before bed and eating at just the right times and so on and so forth, and I hit a 90 or a 86. I think last night, for example, was an 86. Now, this is mostly what the Garmin can do. It doesn't have a touchscreen, but what I use it for mostly is just to track the workouts, and because it is more tactile, it has these buttons, they just work, even though they sometimes have a little bit of latency, it works way better. It is way more of an actual physical device, similar to the old running watches you could also have, compared to this one, which is much more like a smartphone, and then sometimes lags for 20, not for 20 minutes, but maybe for 20 or 30 seconds, which then is already too much, and then you just don't track the cycling you just did, or the cycling commute you just did, and so on and so forth. Now, also, I use now the Garmin watch for planning my training, because it also has a Garmin Connect feature. So, the Garmin Connect is a platform, not a feature, as I said, just mentioned falsely. And there you can set different workouts, and one big thing about the Garmin ecosystem, in addition to other advantages, is that you, within a given strength workout, can track the exercises. This is not possible in Samsung Health, to my knowledge. And so therefore I was able to basically predefine workouts, which I then can track in the workout with the watch. So workout tracking of weights and also of repetitions, repetition tracking. How many deadlifts am I doing? This is, if the Garmin watch knows what exercise I'm doing, because I'm telling it to. Of course, there's also an automatic tracking feature that detects the exercise, similar to the Samsung watch, but this is mostly useless when it comes to exercise, when it comes to automated exercise tracking. But if you tell the watch, okay, I have this predefined plan, I'm now doing deadlifts, then it tracks the repetitions. And if I then know what weight I did, and I have to remember, because I afterwards correct this usually, then I have a workout that is simultaneously a test, a strength test. And if I then do a 1 rep max test at the beginning, then I can see, as I saw this year, that after years of strength training, I began deadlifting only like 1 or 2 years ago, but I trained with body weight exercises, but also with weights since the age of 12. And this year I have been hitting PR after PR after PR. Not so much that I now have very decent values compared to other people in the gym, but I would say now that at least my strength age, according to this eGym app, which I already told you about, is now 31. And this is only 4 years older than I am, whereas my cardio age, for example, is 24. The cardio age is based on resting heart rate, it's based on blood pressure, which I now can just screenshot from the app, and then I enter it into the strength age, not strength age, but into the biological age calculation of the eGym app. And so you have to enter the values manually. This is not so useful. I recently also purchased Inside Tracker, and there you can connect to Garmin. Again, a plus point for Garmin that they have this integration. And in there, so Insight Tracker, for example, gets the resting heart rate automatically. It gets your workout intensity automatically and then tells you you should, for example, do more intense workouts, more interval workouts, or have a higher heart rate when doing these interval workouts in order for you to improve. And this is also something Garmin is more on the side on interpreting the data and actually making it possible for you to improve. Garmin also has a fitness age, but this fitness age has the problem that it does not connect to my body composition scale, so therefore it lacks the weight. The only way I found that I could enter weight without body fat into Garmin is by entering it manually into FitnessPal. Now FitnessPal would also sync to Samsung Health, where I can sync these values to, or these metrics to, or these readings to, but the automated readings do not land in Garmin. Only the values I enter manually into MyFitnessPal, which again connects to Garmin, are then appearing in Garmin, and then I can use them. Now, this is the downside of the fitness age of Garmin, but Garmin has all the other data. It has your resting heart rate. It knows your VO2 max, whereas Samsung Health, for example, does not show your VO2 max, only in a run that actually was able to calculate VO2 max, because you have to have a flat distance that you ran over basically a given set of time. Or let's just say, okay, you have to have a certain distance on a flat surface for Samsung Health, also Garmin, to then take a measurement, or not a measurement, but a VO2 max estimate, because obviously it doesn't measure what you actually exhale. Now, these are all the different devices, these two smartwatches. Mostly I think of this here now as my smartwatch. I use it to set alarms and so on and so forth. And I also use it occasionally to pay, which is also very useful if I lose my portemonnaie, or if I lose my phone, or my phone's battery is dead. And then I can just use this. And I can also use this in case of an emergency. Let's say somebody has a stroke, then I always have this on me, and ideally it's charged, and then I can call somebody. Whereas with this watch, Garmin also offers one single watch that has LTE, or where you can call people, I think, and it's the Forerunner 945, but this one doesn't. And since Garmin doesn't have this, well, I have two watches. Another thing to consider when having one watch, I think, is that with every exercise, it's basically a repetition of weight, especially when you're running. If you have a little bit more weight on one side compared to the other, then you could over time develop some adjustment to this, and therefore run maybe slightly skewed, which would also not be that beneficial. I mean, this watch is a little bit heavier than this. I think this is 50 grams, whereas this is, I think, 35 or something like this. And therefore, well, I also like the symmetry of it, so that's the reason I wear two watches, in addition to all the different devices I showed you today. Maybe two additional thoughts. The first thought is the one, of course, you're going to the doctor and you're young, and the doctor tells you, what are you even doing here? But this is just one side of the picture. The other side of the picture is that, for example, I am not that good in terms of VO2 max. My VO2 max is currently 54, and I've worked very hard for the 54. I previously had 53 and 52 since beginning to track, or beginning to see this metric appearing in either Samsung Health or Garmin Health, or Garmin Connect rather. And as Peter Attia, in multiple different domains or metrics, mentions that, or it seems to be the case, this is now my interpretation, not Peter Attia's or anyone else's interpretation, that interpretation of course, only things I've read and so on and so forth. Age is basically the thing that follows time, and time is basically, you could call it the enemy. So as you live, and because evolution has not optimized our body beyond the point of peak fertility, where we would get our children and then maybe bring up the children, and therefore maximizing fitness as the people who have the most children, which then, not necessarily the most children, but the genes that make it into the next gene pool, to maybe rely on Richard Dawkins here. Richard Dawkins mostly stated that it is the gene and not the individual that makes it into the next generation. So if the gene then makes it into the next generation, then the gene itself basically was evolutionary fit. Now, there is this idea that because nobody cares if an 80-year-old lives to 85 or to 80, basically the net benefit for the genes is then zero for this, because he already basically had children when he was 25, 35, and so on and so forth. the idea is that evolution did not optimize us to live longer. Now, as basically we reach the state where, I don't know if it is when we have children or when it is basically peak fertility, which also coincides with a few other health metrics, or seems to coincide with a few other health metrics. This is now based on something Andrew Huberman recently said in a podcast. Then the problem is that body declines. And as the body declines with age and time, all of the metrics go down in accordance or in correlance or correlating basically with age. So the idea is now that you can take age, and as you take age and you compare yourself to maybe somebody who is 30 years old and somebody who is 25 years old or somebody who is 18, then it depends on the metric. Strength, for example, is not maximum strength, I think, at age 18, but a lot of other metrics seem to basically be better and better the more we approach age 18, or maybe it's 21 for some other metrics. And the idea therefore now is that you can compare yourself to the average 18-year-old, 35-year-old, and therefore have now an interpretation for all these different data sets, all these different metrics, whether it's blood pressure. Is my blood pressure good? Is my blood pressure as good as a 35-year-old or an 80-year-old or a 12-year-old? And this gives everybody, because everybody knows kind of how someone looks who is 12, how someone looks who is 25, how someone looks who is like 40. Everybody already has this reference frame of age, and therefore you can take all these different things and bring them together on a common frame, and this common frame is age. And therefore this idea, which was recently brought up again and again by a guy called Brian Johnson, who is a millionaire who has been trying to reverse his biological age, so to go back basically to the healthiest stage he can be in, or maybe even beyond the healthiest stage he was in at age 18, but to go even beyond this stage, to just prevent the age process, or the aging process, from making him worse in all of these different metrics. And this is in part what I've tried kind of to make a very minimal version of, but this very minimal version is, of course, better than no version in my eyes. And also, Garmin, for example, has helped me a lot with finding out where I am good, where I'm not good. For example, with strength, I am very bad, as the eGym app, for example, has told me. My strength age, despite trying and despite basically hitting almost every single workout this year, I maybe skipped 2 workouts this year. That's probably about it. And I tried in every single workout, and despite this, my strength age is still 31. Despite PR after PR, maybe every week, but then for 4 weeks or 8 weeks, nothing, as it goes, I am still strength age 31. My metabolic age and my metabolic age seems also to be not that good, mostly because I'm too high in body fat, and this then seems to bring down all of the other values. For example, VO2 max is based on milliliters per kilogram per millit. So as the kilograms, so basically the thing that is VO2 max is scaled to how much you weigh. So the less you weigh with the same absolute VO2 performance, the better your VO2 max will be. So I did a calculation where I said, okay, what if I was 5% body fat, and this then would result, if I take this linearly, in VO2 max that was 60. So this is 54 to 60, just because I would have lost a certain amount of fat in this idea. Of course, I probably will not be able to do this because, what else should I do compared to the previous weeks and compared to the last months? But so much about biological age and about measuring. And this, I think, is a conclusion.